This is ACOFAE. Laura Marie and Jessica Marie proudly present A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, a podcast. Fair warning, everything the hosts say is explicit, full of spoilers and adult content and shall not be used against them. They have opinions. Let's try not to drag anyone for expressing themselves and just have fun for an hour. We all deserve it.
This episode contains no spoilers and is spoiler-free with the author herself. Enjoy!
Everybody, and welcome to A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, your weekly deep dive into the fantasy, literature, and fandoms that we love. I'm Laura Marie.
And I'm Jessica Marie.
And today we are welcoming a very special guest and our new friend, Aimee Phan,
who is the author of her newest release, a confirmed duology, The Lost Queen, which is out on May 6, 2025. Welcome, Aimee.
Welcome.
My name is Aimee Phan, and I'm the author of a debut YA fantasy book called The Lost Queen. So The Lost Queen is the first in a duology, and this is a book that is inspired by the Vietnamese historic myth about the Hai Ba Chung, which are the Trung sisters. And these are two Vietnamese warrior queens who founded the country. They rebelled against the Han Empire and established the country by leading an army, mostly of women, to take back their land. And they ruled the country for 3 years before they were overtaken again by the massive Han Empire. And so the myth goes that the sisters actually, rather than surrender themselves to the Chinese army, chose to kill themselves. And they did this by either drowning in the river, that's one of the myths. Other versions say that they jumped off a cliff. And so I was always intrigued by this story and this idea of what if they didn't discover the bodies? What if something else had happened to the sisters? And so I had always wanted to write about them. And I tried to imagine a story where the spirits of the sisters somehow came back to this world. And they came back reincarnated in two girls who happened to be living in modern-day San Jose, California. And so that is where my story begins.
So we know this is not your first foray into writing, though. Prior to getting to The Lost Queen, you also have a couple other books under your belt. How was that experience? Has that changed? This is, you're a veteran at this point. You're not a novice when it comes to this. So you're very familiar with kind of the ins and outs of publishing, writing. There's a sense of ownership and uncertainty, I feel like now.
Oh, thank you. I wish I felt that way too. It's been over 20 years since my first book, and I published my first book. This book I wrote when I was very young. I was just fresh out of grad school, and I'll still say that even though this is my third book, I still feel like whenever I come to writing a new book, it feels daunting and exciting, and it feels like the rules change every time. And, so it still feels fresh and exciting to me. But my first two books, and I would say all my books, the starting point from where I write is in a place of curiosity. I write when I am curious about something. And so I grew up I was born here in America, in Southern California. I was born 2 years after the end of the Vietnam War. To Vietnamese refugee parents. And we were in a community of in Orange County of freshly arrived Vietnamese refugees. And I grew up not really knowing that much Vietnamese history because my parents and a lot of the community were focused on getting past the pain and the trauma of the Vietnam War. So they didn't want to talk about it. And I had a lot of questions growing up. I was curious, why didn't I get to learn how to speak Vietnamese? The reason why I wasn't taught Vietnamese was because my parents had such issues trying to assimilate here with people telling them that they couldn't understand them through their Vietnamese accents. And so my parents didn't want to burden me and my brother with that kind of responsibility. So they thought, they are Americans, they need to speak English, their focus needs to be on English in their future. But not having that language ended up being, I would say, a really big hole in my life. I didn't have access to, I think, a lot of the stories. I didn't have access to the inner workings, I think, of our community. So it put inside me like this curiosity, this yearning, wanting to understand my family's community, my family's heritage. So when I got into college and I started studying Asian American history and Asian history, I realized I could combine two things I really loved. I loved reading. I love reading. I love literature. And I loved understanding and trying to research my past. And so in being able to research Vietnamese history, that is what helped produce my first two books and helped produce The Lost Queen.
And that is so exciting. So I'm just going to say an aside. One of the details in your books is that there is caves. Mm-hmm. Caves are very important. And so it led me on, I just did, I did my research and I learned so much. And so I think it is wonderful just on the very barest surface level, talking about curiosity. It is wonderful to read something, have your curiosity sparked, and then go research it more. Right. And then come back with a better understanding, and then do it again, and then come back. It's wonderful, and that was something that I found myself doing a lot in The Lost Queen. So you're talking about your earlier work, and we're talking about here. What led you to go from writing books for adults to a YA situation?
Well, my first two books have young protagonists anyway, right? So my first book was a collection of stories dealing with that explored grown-up Amerasian and Vietnamese orphans and foster children after the war. So they were young narrators. And then my second book also had a young narrator, a character named Cherry Chung. So I think I've always had an interest in young people as narrators. I think it's a really exciting, uncertain, and fruitful time to write about someone's age, like that transition between childhood and innocence and adulthood, which represents independence and making decisions and making mistakes and having agency in your life and realizing that you have the potential to change the world. So I really love that. So I think my transition was aided by that I already had a natural interest. And I'm also a teacher. I teach at California College of the Arts, which is an arts college here in San Francisco. And I would teach these literature classes. And it was really a challenge to get my students to read the books. They're art students. Unlike my other classes I taught at big state universities, I could always say, well, you're going to get an F, or you're going to fail this class. And then that would usually get students to read the books. I realized with art students, they are not motivated necessarily by grades or GPA. They came to an arts college to make art. They came to be inspired. They came to be creative. And so it forced me to realize, okay, how can I inspire them to want to read? And so I would try all these tricks, all these strategies, come up with all these different classes. And the first time I taught a young adult literature class, I didn't have to do anything at all to get them to read. They actually read the books ahead of schedule. And they were so excited to come and discuss furiously and learn so much. And I was pretty amazed by it. And as I was teaching the class, and it still is my favorite class to teach, I realized that young adult literature, even if someone doesn't end up becoming a big reader, right, for the rest of their lives, the books you read as a young adult end up staying with you a lot longer than any other books you'll read, because they are often the books that you seek out for refuge, either as an escape, I want to escape my situation, I need to get into another world. They will provide answers. That was, I think, the case for me. I wanted to understand relationships. I wanted to understand how to make big decisions. I wanted to understand the world. And that is what young adult literature can do too. I think the books we read then, the ones we choose, end up becoming really formative in creating one's sense of identity, trying on different identities, trying to see what kind of person you want to be. And also another part of that is understanding your role in this community, in the world, like making those big decisions. What can I do? Even if it is rooted in fantasy. And I think fantasy is such an important metaphor for literature in terms of understanding greater questions about the world, because you can just do so much more. You can make so much bigger leaps. You can make much bigger metaphors and understanding when a character is going through any kind of emotion. I feel like fantasy really kicks the doors open in terms of how you can represent that, where I feel like you can't always achieve that in realistic fiction, right? So for me, like young adult and then pushing it even further and going into young adult fantasy really liberated any kind of walls I had set up in writing. So already when I decided to write The Lost Queen and explore these two sisters, I was already taking this huge leap of imagining them reincarnated, right? Reincarnated into this world. So at that point, why not just go for it? Just go for the magical realism, go for time travel, go for all these different elements that I don't think I would have pursued in my earlier books of fiction.
Well, I think one thing that you see, I don't want to say that there's a resurgence, but I think a return to young adult fantasy and young adult fiction is reading it with new perspective and new eyes, because these are these genres that we explored when we were younger. And then I don't think some of the messages could hitting the same as when you're returning to them as an adult and the message was right there, or reading them now and that wasn't a genre that you were necessarily reading, because I mean, those formative years kind of make or break some people's continuation with reading when you're forced to read for educational purposes. And then, aside from all of I say work in air quotes, especially in this age range, you have school, you have expectations, you have jobs. Some people who are minors are taking care of their family. Mm-hmm. And then you still have to find a way to bounce school. And by the time you have any free time, the last thing, especially with all of the required reading, you're not thinking about enjoyment. So to find this return or new discovery of genres and the messaging and the morals and the themes that you're taking away from young adult work, sometimes it's hitting us harder as an adult because we have a second to breathe and we can actually consume the media, not just by words, but like processing the messaging.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I don't know why it is. I wish adolescence wasn't so hellish. It really is. Like, I have a 16-year-old daughter and I have a 13-year-old son. And I lie to them all the time about this. I say, it's just 4 years. It's gonna get a lot better, right? But there's something about the feelings you go through during this period that feel like it's imprinted in you. Do you know what I mean? And so young adult literature ends up becoming like these manuals to survive, right? Ways to see other people, ways to understand conflict, ways to understand yourself, that I don't think literature that we read as adults have the same kind of hold on us. And so that's why I think it becomes incredibly important. And that's why it's so wonderful that there are so many different genres that young adults can choose from to be able to find those messages, and to find, characters that they gravitate to because they say exactly how they feel. And there's such amazing validation that young people feel, and that, even older people feel when they read those sentences and realize that's exactly how I feel. And you don't feel alone anymore. You don't feel like such a freak. You don't feel so unlovable, so unwanted. You feel like, okay, it's all right. Someone else went through this and it's in print. Do you know what I mean? And so when you see it in print, it feels validating. It feels true. And so I think that's my favorite connection of being able, as a writer, being able to complete that circle, because I was such a devoted reader. I would just read and I would just put everything into it. They had my entire focus and concentration in a way that I don't give to books now, where I just believed everything they said. And I feel like that is such a gift that young readers can give to books.
And especially now, not saying that any of us are of any age, but readers now have a lot easier time going into a bookstore or, going into the library and being able to find fantasy young adult books. They're labeled. It's right there. Like it's clear. It was a little bit more difficult when we were growing up. Like you really had to look and really comb through those stacks. But I think that's another thing, write what you want to see. And this is the story that I want to see. This is what I needed when I was growing up. So I'm going to make sure that it's out there for whoever needs it in the future. And we're talking about, all these emotions. It's also such a responsibility too for you as a writer, knowing that kids that are this age reading this, everything is the end of the world, right? Everything is just, oh my gosh, I can't go to this party. It's the end of the world. He's not looking at me. It's the end of the world. We lost the game. Everything, it's the end of the world. Everything is catastrophic. So when we're reading these stories and our characters are also going through something slightly similar, but with these real consequences. And as you said, I can pick it up and point to it and be like, see, these are my feelings. This is what I'm going through. And then you can take that and share it with someone else and say, see, understand me. This is what I feel. And then we can talk about it together. It's such a wonderful feeling. So let's talk about you as a writer writing this. Write what you want to see. Where did your characters come from? Have they been talking to you for a while? And what kind of writer are you? Are you a pantser? Are you a planner? Take us through it.
I'm a slow writer, and I'm trying to get better at it because YA, you cannot write slow. And I've discovered that. And I admire so much the speed that young adult lit writers operate on, and at such quality. It's amazing to me. I had the benefit of, well, it wasn't even the benefit. It was just I needed to get it right. Even though this was my third book, and like I said, I felt like it was fresh, was that writing YA is different. It is not easier. It's actually quite demanding. And young adult readers have very justifiably high expectations of their storytelling. I realized I was writing a lot slower. I was getting feedback it's got to happen a lot sooner. All this action, you just need to go. I really wanted to write about young women. I really wanted to write about these sisters. I never had a sister. I always wanted one. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful just to have a built-in best friend? So I love this idea that they were sisters, that they were queens, and then in my book, and this isn't a spoiler, they have amazing powers, right? And what would happen if a teenager realized that she could have that power? I had read this book by Ruth Ozeki. It's called A Tale for the Time Being. And it's a beautiful book. And the reason why it resonated with me so much is there is a character in the book, a young girl who gets bullied mercilessly. And I remember reading it and just feeling so close to this book. And I still remember where I was when I was reading certain scenes about her getting bullied. And the book gets bleak. And it gets bleak to the point where you just think, there is no escape. This is just terrible. And this is when I realized how empowering fantasy could be. Because this is an author who, we weren't expecting it. And this isn't a spoiler, but something magical and fantastical happens. And of course, a very cynical reader would be like, oh, that's not realistic. But the writer had worked so hard in helping us get so close and invested in the character that when that moment happened, you just feel like your heart is going to burst. You're just like, yes. The writer had earned, and the character had earned that moment of triumph. And that's when I think I really realized that I wanted to try to write fantasy, because fantasy in a way encompasses so much of the hope and the energy that you want young people to feel. You want to have the strength for your characters. it's a really relatable, I think, story arc for us to watch a character suffer and to be with a character who suffers and endures and realize that that character can still stand up and do something. And so that's what was really appealing to me. I think in my first two books, they were kind of bleak a little bit. They were very realistic fiction. There are moments of triumph, but in many ways, it's that the first two books were dealing with realistic situation and like the largest, like kind of realization, like the largest epiphanies the characters could have was just like closure within themselves. In young adult literature, that kind of closure and epiphany cannot happen internally necessarily. It's much more rewarding. And I have found it's much more rewarding as a writer and a reader to see that enacted and to change the world. And so I think for me, like that was an incredible moment to be able to write. So I write, it took me a while to realize that was what was going to happen. Like in my head, it swirled around for a long time, but it took the help of like a lot of wonderful readers, an awesome agent, Janine Camus, an incredible editor, with T.R. Cottrell at Penguin Putnam to help enact and engage into Jolie's story, into Jolie's adventure. Because it's hard when you first read about a character who feels like she's getting bullied all the time and feels like she has no agency. So how do you build that agency within her and also make her? So it took a lot of tries for me. So I had a lot of drafts. Trying things and experimenting until I could figure that out. And so I'm glad it took that long because with every new version, I do feel like it got better. I felt like, and so I'm really proud of what happened, but it took a lot of back and forth and understanding the characters, understanding their roles and where they were going to go to be able to finally realize what her journey was going to be.
And what a journey it is. Literally, it is life-changing. I'm an only child, so I have no siblings. So I love reading about sisterhood. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And to try to imagine what that bond must be like, a permanent best friend, like how wonderful that must be. And so we start off with our main character, Jolie, and she participates in a sport. My question to you, do you swim?
I used to swim, yes.
Oh. Do you really?
Yeah.
I used to have friends that were swimmers. So the amount of detail that was in here, I was like, hey, that's a lot. I bet she's a little familiar with that sport. That was wonderful. And just like a fun little surprise. I feel like that's just not a sport that gets explored a lot. So I really enjoyed all of that. And then of course, no spoilers, but there are, as, you said, like fantastical elements here that happen in and out of the pool, which were just absolutely wonderful. And another one of the themes that is woven throughout your book, The Lost Queen, is, I will say family and found family as well. And the very complex relationships that kind of brings to the table. So my question for you is, when you are kind of planning out this story, is it easy for you to kind of write these sisterly relationships, these like familial relationships, or is it more of the characters are just telling you that this is what you're doing?
That is such a good question. Thank you. I think, so I started off thinking, I'm so excited about writing sisters, about these powerful girls, right? Jolie meets in the opening chapters a character named Huong, who is a popular girl who is a junior. So she's a year older than Jolie. And Jolie is quite fascinated by her. And so their relationship, it's, in a way, it does explore sisterhood, but it also explores, I feel, female friendship, which I find really fascinating and interesting. And it continues to be that thing that we're all still trying to figure out, like for the rest of our lives, because it gets really complicated, because it's hard to be a girl. It's hard to be a woman. It's not easy. And this idea of like, how do you have that friendship? How do you have that trust? And what happens when that trust is betrayed? So I didn't realize when I first started writing this, that there would be issues of trust. There would be issues of understanding each other and competition, even within sisters, even between sisters and even between friends. And so I thought that was really important. In the first drafts of this book, Jolie has, her father is around. And I had her mother not around. And then in subsequent drafts, I realized the father had to, and then they also lived with the grandparents because the grandfather is a fortune teller and he figures prominently into the book as well. And then as I was writing, the father kind of started fading and I realized he isn't, it would actually be better for Jolie to only live with her grandparents right now. And it was for narrative clarity's sake, but it was also, I felt, it felt like a fitting choice because for a lot of Vietnamese families, especially, in the years after the war, a lot of families were fractured. A lot of families, you didn't necessarily live with your immediate family, or families were broken up, or there were, marriages and stepchildren. And I realized that as I was writing the grandparents and Jolie and their relationship, and it was very much me creating a relationship that I never got to have with my grandparents. Both, like I said before, I never got to speak and learn Vietnamese, and my grandparents only spoke Vietnamese, and they lived in different states from me. And I was so curious about them. There were times, because I was a very curious child. I loved to talk and chat. I wanted to ask them so many questions. Do you know, I wanted to know so many things, and I never got to know those things because, and then it's not like I didn't love them. We would see each other, we would smile, would give them hugs and kisses, and I would eat with them, but it was mostly silence. Or they would speak in Vietnamese, my parents would translate, and then I would answer, and then they would translate back. And so in the book, I do think I'm exploring what it would have been like to have had a relationship with my grandparents, what it would have been like to, and she does have a very close relationship with both of them. And so in many ways, like it's the relationship she has with Huong, and the relationship she has with her grandparents are ones that I think I was working out to. Like, what would I have loved to have had? What would I have loved to say? And like to have those kind of interactions. It's interesting. I've never written about a brother-sister, and I have a brother, but it is kind of like me articulating, I think, a lot of the wishes that I had and working through those things and that curiosity.
But there's a respect there. It's not, the love isn't any less, but, to jump back into it, do you feel like this writing process and creating these relationships, do you feel like it healed you in a way?
I think, well, as I get older, I feel like I have, in many ways, like I do feel like I understand my parents better and I understand my grandparents better. I think that's inevitable. I wish I could say that for all people. Maybe it is the case, but for me in my particular case, I think it's because you miss the people who have left. You feel yourself enacting roles that you used to be on the other side of, right? So like I feel a great closeness to my mother now that I have a teenage daughter. Now I know all the things she was saying. Now I understand. I understand her frustrations. I understand her anger and her resentment. Like she was super mad at me at times. And looking back on it, she had every right to be. And so I do see like, and as a writer, because I'm writing about these relationships, I'm allowed to walk around it, or I try to really do that, to try to understand the different points of view, and understand why there are the miscommunications, and also understand why I get pushed away, why the parents have to be pushed away in order for them to grow. Like they need to make their own decisions, even if they need to make the mistakes themselves. They don't need me to tell them. But if you do that, you're going to regret it. Like they have to go through that. Like that is what living is. But it's hard. It's super painful. It's painful to watch these old traditions kind of being enacted, these old relationships, these old dynamics, because I wish to say to them like, oh gosh, I want to save you like years of heartache, years of misunderstanding and resentment. I wish I could just fast forward you so that you could just be happy. And
you can learn it without the pain, because it's like, it has to be like such a difficult, you don't want to say, I told you so, but you knew it was going to happen. And I feel like we feel like that as we get older. You're like, this is the hardest thing. I told you so, but you don't, you're like, I don't want it. Yeah.
Like you really don't want to have a crush on that boy. You really don't.
You sure you want to go there? Are we sure we're going to do this?
Absolutely. And all you can do as a parent is just like, I'm trying so hard to be supportive, to give them the space to do that. And then they don't want to be told, I told you so. They don't want to be judged. They just want to feel secure and safe to be able to make those choices. It's really hard. It's so much harder to be a teen now than it was back when I was a teenager. They've got
unimaginable. Unimaginable. Yep. I could never.
Now I honestly don't think I would survive now.
They're
so strong.
They're just like, I talked to my undergrad students, my college students, and I'm like, you guys are so wise. I was like, how did you make that jump from like, honestly, being so wild and reckless in high school and doing just so many crazy things to the wisdom you have now? And their response is just also so smart. They just say like, we figured out it hurt. We figured out the pain and that we didn't want to go through that again. We figured out when things weren't good for us. I think it's an amazing realization.
They don't have to keep repeating it. They're like, once is enough. We're good. We don't need to keep relearning this lesson.
I know. And then I watched that too. I'm just like, oh man, you're going to have to repeat that a few times. Huh? I was like, are you sure? Like, do you just want me to make the connections for you? Because I can do it. I can show you, like, you see that? You're doing that again. But yeah. And that's why they read too. Like, it's much easier for them to judge and get invested in characters. It's safe, right? To experience an adventure in a book is much safer than going into a car and going to do something that is dangerous. You know?
You might see it already play out in the stories that you're creating where you're like, I remember this character did this and this is what happened. I don't know if I want to expose myself to that. So there's a lot of lessons being learned.
Oh, so true. So true.
Well, and lessons being learned. Our setting is California, various places in California. And I would say it's a character in and of itself because the place has so much to do. California itself and its earthquakes play a major part. There's also wildfires that play a major part, all things that we know about California, but also just the vibes, right? Windows down, music up, down the highway, like out we go, like nature preserves, we're hiking, look at these cliffs, look at the ocean. It invokes a particular vibe that, say having it set in Florida wouldn't. So I would say that like California it's also, as much as it is a celebration of everything, it is also just kind of like a little love letter to all of these places in California as well, because setting is as important as a lot of other elements of the story, such as dragons. And I am going to ask you about your history of dragons, your research. Do you love dragons? They're on the cover and it is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I love the cover so much. It is. I couldn't have asked for a better cover. I love that when you hold it upside down, you see San Jose and you see the girl. I just think that's wonderful. It is one of my favorite things to be able to show people that if you hold it upside down, like you realize it's two worlds on that book. The dragons. I was absolutely influenced. Like dragon is like the most exciting sign in the Vietnamese zodiac, in the lunar zodiac, right? Like when people find out your child is going to be born in the year of the dragon, it's like this reverence. It's just like, wow. And it's interesting. So I was actually pregnant during the year of the dragon. So my son is a dragon. And all these Vietnamese people would come up and they would be like, oh, you're going to have a dragon. And then they would get this look of concern on their face. And they would say, is it a girl or a boy? And when I would say it was a boy, they were relieved. Isn't that interesting? Because they were scared of girl dragons. And I was like, that is super interesting.
That's something.
I know, and I think that rooted into my brain as I was writing. This idea, like, why are you so afraid of girl dragons, of women dragons? And so as I was writing the book and realizing, these girls, are going to encounter a lot more in their past that is not just about, their Vietnamese, about their their fighting and their, war with the Han, and it was going to become more magical. I did want to incorporate, I think, I wanted a vessel. Like, the human body is very small, like in retrospect to the world. And I was like, what would be, honestly, a vessel, a creature that could embody, I think, the strength and the power and the influence that I wanted my characters to have, especially because I was exploring also just what it means to have like these overwhelming emotions and these incredible events like that feel overwhelming. And I realized the dragon was the perfect vessel, and it was a mystical creature that is celebrated in Vietnam and in a lot of cultures. Everyone has their own version of a dragon, right? The Western dragons have wings. The Eastern dragons do not. But they all embody this kind of magic and fierceness and respect. And people, I think, are fascinated by them. And so that is definitely why dragons figure pretty significantly in this duology.
That's such a fun answer as well, because there are a little sprinklings of the dragon origin myth of Vietnam in here as well, which yes. I, again, was like, interested. I'm going to learn more. Thank you. And I did. And it was very interesting and enlightening, and all spoilers, which will not be mentioned here, but just know, great stuff. Great yes. stuff. Great stuff. Okay. So I do want to touch on, though, the sisters, the research that was done here. So we had this idea. We want to do sisters. We're reincarnating and we're putting in a new fun situation. So the history of our sisters is, it's very important. Like, they are celebrated. There are temples dedicated to them. Can you kind of walk us through the importance of them? And then also, this book is coinciding with the anniversary of the end of the war. So kind of like tie all of this together for us.
Sure. So yeah, the Hai Ba Chung, I remember this story of the Chung sisters, just hearing about my parents, just like, it's so ingrained in, I think, Vietnamese culture, even Vietnamese diaspora culture. So even if you're not living in Vietnam. And I remember the trip that my family and I took back when we went to Vietnam. And we were on, actually, Hai Ba Chung is a very famous avenue in Ho Chi Minh City. So, and there are temples and there are statues and there are parades, lots of honors to them. And I remember my dad just mentioned, it's just like a couple of lines, again, like that they would say to me, like, oh, yes, this is the Hai Ba Chung, the Chung sisters are the reason why we are a matrilineal society, which I think is easy to forget, right? In the overall patriarchy of the world, you forget that. Vietnamese women do not take their husbands' last names. And that is a tradition. And it was very confusing to me as a kid because my grandmother had a different last name. But my mother, when she came to America, she took my father's last name. So, so I was just really confused and trying to understand that. But, so there is this matrilineal history of the Hai Ba Chung sisters and the idea. And I loved researching and finding out why they came into power and how they did. And they, in some versions, they decided to rebel against the Han Empire because either their father had been killed by the Chinese, by the Han Empire, and so they were avenging his death, or the husband was. And so those are two elements I didn't include purposefully in the book because I really wanted the focus to be on them as queens and them, coming into power. But the stories about them raising an army that was mostly of women was fascinating to me. The fact, and there's one, not just one, but there are multiple versions of the story where there was a famous warrior in their army who actually gave birth during battle and then strapped the baby on her back and continued to fight. And I was like, that's incredible. Do you know what I mean? But the symbolism of that story is just like this real focus on the fact that women are the ones who created the country. It was built on them and on their bravery and courage and their resilience. And so I really loved that. And I really wanted to celebrate that and explore that, but also understand like the sacrifices that come with that come with, because even though it's a celebration, I think, of women and it's a celebration of these, warrior queens, the fact is that they were doing battle against the patriarchy, right? And that's and it's often critiqued, like this idea, like, well, they only ruled for 3 years because they're women. You know what I mean? Like, it's just because they were too weak, they didn't have the power. And so I really wanted to explore like what that meant, like why the story has those different versions in it.
Well, and I know we're coming to the end of our discussion, and I'm going to tease a portion of a line without giving any spoilers. But I'll quote it, and it's towards the end of the book where ... you're my sister first. And again, with what we were just talking about, we have sisterhood. We have the matrilineal society that was ruling and fighting and creating, because I think people you're not just creating an army, you're creating a government at these times, you're creating life. Mm-hmm. And that could also be just like literally and figuratively of what is happening in the book. And it sets us up also into the confirmed duology. Like, where are you at with this process? Are you waiting for, The Lost Queen to be released first before you start focusing on book 2? How has that been now that you had 2 other previous books? And this is, and I say series, but it really is a duology. It's a continuation of a work that you've already been working through.
Yes. So I'm at work on it right now, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. Yes. So it's, I think second books can be so fun because, and I think about this in many narratives, not only in book series, but like in sequels or always like a second season of a show. Like, I feel like you do all the hard work and the world building and the character establishment in the first book. And then in the second book, you really can just let that world play. Like, you don't have the burden of creating because you already did that, right? But the second book also has the opportunities to explore more ideas, explore more themes, and also, and this is my favorite part as a writer, is to upend and subvert reader expectations of this is what you thought you knew in the first book, but actually, things can change in the second book. And so that's what I really wanted to see. And so Jolie and Huong are not alone. And that is what is really important to understand for the duology. Like, the Chung sisters, they are not alone, right? So this idea of only 2 of them, only 2 dragons, only 2 gods. No, actually, there is much more in their world that they have to uncover. And I think that's what's really exciting. Like, it evolved from, just being an inspiration of this like Vietnamese myth into something that I hope is much more global and worldwide. This
feels like the tagline of The Real World. You think you know, but you have no idea. The Real World, Lost Queen. Like, and here we are, San Jose.
Oh, thank you.
This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Especially, we're recording this on a Friday, so we're really doing it for everybody. This is the time where you can tell us where we can find you. Do you have any events coming up? Your socials, dates, teasers, anything in the world that you would like to share with us? Now is your time.
Oh, thank you. So you can find me on Instagram, and I am trying to do TikTok also because TikTok's amazing. But Instagram I'm much more comfortable with, but I'm getting there. And I'm at Aimee Phan Writes, and that is also the name of my website, aimeephanwrites.com. And so I am doing several readings in the Bay Area to launch the book, and then I'm hopefully doing more events through the summer and fall. And like I said, there is a second book coming out. So I imagine that I will continue making appearances and speaking about the book, speaking about the series for the next few years.
We're so excited, and thank you for taking the time. This is wonderful because it really is. I mean, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's just because it's YA, but but it's for everybody. And it really is for everybody. I don't think you need to be like, oh, this is my preferred genre. And it's a great way to learn. Because like Laura was also saying, that when you want to stop what you're reading and find out more and be like, wait, that's what makes reading exciting again too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Your questions have been awesome. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it is all to you. We do all to impress you. So thank you so much. We accept the compliment and we appreciate you, your time, your book and everything. And we hope to see you again, maybe for book 2.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would love to come back.
Please.
You.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye. Please make sure you're following Aimee on all of her socials. We'll have that information in our show notes. And as always, please feel free to follow us. We're at ACOFAE Podcast on Instagram. We're also ACOFAE Laura and ACOFAE Jessica on TikTok. We'll talk to y'all soon. Thanks so much. Bye.